Welcome back to Football Unspoken. Today we're going to be talking about one of the biggest clubs in the world, Manchester United. But before we get into that, Rob, can you tell me what do you see as the difference between a head coach and a manager of a football club?
I'd probably say a head coach. The main difference is that a head coach is pretty much in charge of everything on the field. So it'll be your coaching as well as your tactics as well as all that. But I think a manager probably has more of a hand in your off field, such as uh, bringing in probably their own training staff as well as being a part of like the transfers and all that.
Absolutely. I think we're in agreement there, but that brings me back to the main topic for today around Manchester United, which is looking at how the club has kind of underperformed, not just this season, but in previous years. And yet they've continued to hire what I would deem as managers in Jose Mourinho, Van Gaal, etc. Would the Manchester project actually be better suited for a head coach rather than a manager at the moment?
I'm not sure. I think the problem is that you've got too many cooks in the kitchen is the saying there. So I think you'd probably be on the track of a yes in that case. But I also think that it's one of those I can't tell you how many head coaches have won trophies at the end of the day. Like it's all well and good to be like, oh, I've got head coaches, but you can't sit there and pretend Jose Mourinho was a head coach. He's a manager. Sir Alex Ferguson wasn't a head coach. He was a manager. Pep Guardiola isn't a head coach. He's a manager. When you think about the top coaches in the world, if we want to go there, then they're all managers. None of them are really coaches. None of them are really just considered head coaches because you want to be able to bring the players who fit what you're trying to do in. And the one thing I would say is that yeah, maybe they do need to get a head coach in, but at the same time, when you look at the managers they have brought in, there's been this weird, stringent way of like, I'm playing my way, and this is what's going to happen, and I don't care. And it's like, well, hang on, you don't have a team that will let you do that. So maybe let's try and figure out another way. Like at some point, the onus needs to be on the manager to actually coach his players.
You made a really interesting point there about head you can't think of a head coach who's won a Premier League or Champions League, and I can't argue with that. But where I would argue a little bit is I can give you plenty of examples of head coaches who have vastly improved their clubs and moved them up the table very quickly. So you look at, I actually think Pochettino is a head coach rather than a manager. If I look at what he's done, the best work he's done as a manager is developing players, developing the on-field squad, the squad he's been given already, versus bringing in new players and as you said, doing off-field things which would develop the club further. So Pochettino, as an example of Spurs, he took what he had already as a squad and he developed that to effectively a top two team in the Premier League. Arteta, when he first came in at Arsenal, was a head coach, not a manager. He was very specifically description orientated for his contract was head coach, not manager. He actually got promoted to manager after a few seasons. You looked at how he turned that around. I would argue, and you tell me whether this is right or wrong, Eddie Howe, when he first came in for the Newcastle job, was a head coach job, not a manager job. And an example of that was what he did with Joe Linton, where he transformed the player and developed the player. Now, for me, that is what a head coach does the best, is they develop the players they have already. And the reason why with Manchester United I target that head coach responsibility over manager is because for years now, the managers who've been there have been allowed to spend 100 to 200 million every year, have the players come in, underperform, and then they just get to leave basically for peanuts. And it's not just about wasting resources, but there's such an opportunity there for a manager to come in and get the most out of Hoyland, get the most out of Garnacho, get the most out of uh, Diallo, like any of these players. Clearly, they're underperforming with the managers that they've had. And I don't believe the answer for Manchester United is to just go throw another 100 million, 200 million at the wall and sell all their current players, for a far reduced price because they can't get any value out of them. And we've seen, as I was mentioning earlier, over the years, Di Maria's come and gone because they couldn't get anything out of him. Lukaku's come and gone because they couldn't get anything out of him. There's so many of these players who just underperformed and they sold them on the cheap. Versus, I feel like if they get a manager such as a Pochettino type, they could get so much more out of the current group
Yeah, I mean, in terms of that, I still don't know how much I would say that potentially I agree with you on Eddie Howe when he first came in. He was more of a head coach than a manager. Um, I would probably agree that Pochettino is someone who would be considered a head coach rather than a manager. But I just think for me, I always feel like you want the top man to have more power, realistically. You want him to be able to create the team he wants to create and not be forced into a box where he has to work with players who he doesn't want to work with or don't want to work with him or he struggles to work with. I think that's where a problem comes in. Um and I mean, you can see that with Amorim this year, where in all honesty, the guys he seems to be almost making a bit of a point to the ownership, going, these players don't work in my system, they don't work in my team, and I don't want them. Like Marcus Rashford, yeah, he's not had a great couple of seasons, but he's still one of the best wingers in the league, and he's shown that when he plays for Aston Villa. Um, but because Amorim doesn't want to have a player like that in his team, it's he's being allowed to leave. So I think that whilst I agree that potentially there's the idea that they could need a head coach, I just think that managers the biggest part of their job is being a head coach, not buying players, not getting players in, not trying to create the team around their system. It's about getting what you have, especially when you come into a team. It's about using what you have and actually poaching them. That is still a big part of management, and that's always been a big part of management. Just because we like to call them head coaches versus managers doesn't mean that a manager doesn't have to be a head coach, if you get what I mean.
When I look at the results that Amarin's got, clearly he so far has underachieved. Now, you could argue about he only wanted to come in the summer, so it's not completely his fault. But I have concerns about just blindly putting faith into him going into next season, saying, well, once he's got his type of players in, it will get better. I don't doubt that. But this concept that Amarin is the man, there's something about this manager, he's going to turn them around. But they've done this so poorly. And with the players he's had for nearly 6 months now, he hasn't developed a single player. The players the Barely are worse now than they were when he came in. They were better under Ten Hag, this current group of players. So I don't disagree. They're not the type of players he needs for his style. But how long can you hide behind, oh, it's just not my style. I need a little bit more time. It hasn't been that long, but saying that and then just losing nearly every single game. Now, they might win a Europa League and that will salvage everything. But if they don't, I just think he's hiding behind so many smoke and mirrors with atrocious performances, and there's nothing to hold on to as a Manchester United fan to say, you know what, Aaron's had a tough 6 months, but he's been able to develop this, or he's been able to install this style of play, or something along those lines. And that's where I get really concerned for him. I don't know where you think Amron will be with this Manchester United squad next season. I understand it'll be a different squad, but how you think that'll be changed performance wise?
I mean, there's a big part of me that wonders how changed will it be, because you got the chairman, you got Jim Ratcliffe not paying for staff to go to the final, not paying for staff to have Christmas parties and all that, just to save $20 essentially. Um, and like, how can you be doing all this cost cutting measures because we're in so much debt, and then turn around and have a £200 million check next year? Because I mean, realistically, most of the players are trying to sell Anthony. I mean, if Real Betis want to spend 70 million on Anthony, fair dues. But if I'm Real Betis, I'm kind of like, to be honest, you have to get rid of him. He wants to come here. I'll give you 40. You know, like, and if you don't want it 6, someone else can take him. Like, I think that's kind of got to be a bit of a mindset there. The same with Rashford and Aston Villa. I would do the same thing. Cool. If he wants to come here, sick. We'll happily have him, but we're not paying you 80 million for him. We'll pay you 30. And then if it, what the worst is going to happen is that Man United have to find someone else to buy it, you know, from Aston Villa's point of view. So I don't know from a money perspective how changed that team will be. But in terms of Amarin, I've kind of had this belief for a little while, but this idea of system managers really, really annoys me. And I think this idea that system managers are like really good. No, if you've got one system, it's not good enough, to be entirely honest. Like, you need to be able to adapt if you want to be a good enough manager. And when you look at Eddie Howe when he played Chelsea the other week, I don't think we played a 5 at the back more than twice. We played 5 back against Chelsea, got the job done, did exactly what we needed to do. And I that's something that, for example, Amorim hasn't done in this last year, where like you said, it's 6 months where they haven't won 2 games back to back. That's never happened to Man United. Like that's entirely ridiculous. To be sitting there on this hard line of, my system is the best system. I need players to work in my system. No, right now you need to win. You would need to win games. You cannot be Man United landing in 16th. And I guess the big question I have here is what's their goal next year? You know, if they're finishing 16th this year, with or without a Europa League, you know, what is the goal next? What is the goal next year? Where do they want to finish? They want to finish top 12, top 10. They want to be pushing for Europe again. Because if they want to be pushing for Europe, I don't think Amorim's a man, to be entirely honest. I don't think that they're going to be able to change the squad enough and get enough new players in to create the team that he wants. And I'm looking at players like Xerxes, who's come alive a little bit, but still not fantastic. Højlund, who is pretty poor as a striker. You know, there are other players who've come in. Dallo on the wing back, and I'm just like, what are you doing with these players? It's all well and good to say we're bringing players in, but what are you doing with those players realistically? And what is your final goal for next season? Because if it's to finish 10th, yeah, Amorim might do the job. If it's to actually be back where Man United is supposed to be, I don't think Amorim's their man. It feels harsh to be Amorim out at this point in time. I understand that, but for me, I sit there and I'm like, if this was my club, if I was a Man United supporter, I could not stomach this. 6 months of this absolute nonsense, with or without the Europa. I just don't think there's anything to be said about a Man United team finishing 16th. And in my book, if a Man United manager finishes outside the top 12, they shouldn't be there. So I'm very much an Amorim out, to be honest.
Well, there you go, guys. Amorim out is the call from Rob, head manager of the managers. Anyway, we'd love to hear from you guys what you think about Amorim in or out. You think if Manchester United, the project needs a new head coach or a new manager? I'd love to hear from you. Anyway, until next time, this has been Football Unspoken. Cheers.